Евразия – крупнейший материк на планете. 36% площади суши.
Eurasia is the largest continent on Earth, 36% of land, more than 70% of world population, more than half of world GDP, the largest transport nodes, richest natural resources, and the largest share of young population worldwide. Eurasia is the environment of integration and collaboration. Eurasian Economic Union, European Union, ASEAN, are an environment to create confidences in trade, services and capital, high-skilled labor and digitization. Eurasia today is the largest digitization center, the territory of startups and innovation. Over the past few years, digitization has become one of the drivers of economic growth in Eurasia. So what does digital transformation in Eurasia lead? Reducing trade costs,
Финансовых технологий в банковской сфере, повышению качества и глубины интеграции. Евразийский экономический союз один из первых в мире принял и реализует повестку цифровой трансформации. Цифровая трансформация ЕАЭС – это регулирование и проект, платформы и экосистемы, люди и институты. Фонд цифровых инициатив Евразийского банка развития, Институт цифровой трансформации Евразийского экономического союза. Наш прорыв – приложение «Путешествую без COVID-19». И мы активно работаем над другими свершениями. Благополучная и надежная цифровая Евразия – это совместные решения и инициативы по инфраструктурам, данным и пространству доверия. Переход к цифре – это переход к новым технологиям и решениям, новым инфраструктурам. Евразийскому пространству нужна цифровая инфраструктура без барьеров, угроз и с высоким уровнем защиты. Экономика данных и современная система обмена данными, в том числе имеющими юридическую и финансовую значимость, это гарантия качественного управления цифровой трансформации. Межрегиональная интеграция и сотрудничество – залог уверенного и успешного развития в эпоху глобальных цифровых изменений. Объединяя усилия, можно реализовать наш цифровой суверенитет и составить достойную конкуренцию на мировых рынках. Какие шаги необходимо предпринять для создания единой цифровой Евразии?
Hello, dear colleagues. I would like to invite our main speakers today, Fyodor Lukyanov, you're welcome, Andrei Bezrukov, Andrei Filatov, Grigory Marchenko, Marlen Zikayev. Also online, we have Pavel Tkach from Belarus. Dear colleagues, friends, the video has said a lot of things. And, of course, it already contained the main items and points that we would like to discuss today. We have a very respected panel, people well known to you, the wide audience. In the first place, due to their deep thoughts about how to build the common environment, including a digital environment, what in-depth processes are going on in the Eurasian space, what needs to be addressed, where we're making mistakes, and where, conversely, we are making the right points of applying forces to move forward. From this point of view, there's no doubt that digital transformation is one of the most popular topics today. Today, no conference goes without discussing these questions. And because we are practitioners in digitization in the Eurasian Union, we implement specific projects, we handle specific problems. So for us, it's a topic that not only has a meaning in terms of deeper thinking of what's happening with us, because digital transformation has entered our lives so fast, impacting all walks of people's lives, that sometimes we don't even have the time to understand its impact and consequences. On the other hand, we are an organization that deals directly with the implementation of Eurasian projects that are supposed to improve people's lives and business. That's what we do. Here we have 4 points that I would like to bring your attention to, and maybe we're going to have a discussion about that. The first 4 point is like this. Well, there's no doubt that going digital, you improve efficiency. And if you use digital tools, if you digitize the business processes, your performance goes up, efficiency goes up. So why not use the digitization? But on the other hand, there's a different trend, a more in-depth one, that requires understanding of what's happening. It's about the fact that digital solutions bring in a new meaning into our lives, a new content, new concepts that hadn't existed in the past, that emerge exactly because digital technology solutions are emerging, the so-called platform solutions, where whole ecosystems are being built. So where's the conflict? This second trend that deals with the new meanings gets into contradiction with the first one, when we try to digitize the existing business processes. When we are digitizing existing business processes, they start standing in the way of implementing the new meanings. But of course, you can't withstand this new mainstream, but there's a conflict arising, this kind of resistance. And what I am observing with all obviousness today is that our governments are digitizing the services that we are offering to citizens. This digitization is happening within the existing business processes, within ministries, agencies, that institutionally protect their departmental interests, and that's quite natural. They create their own databases, they find their digital solutions, and somehow strengthen their business processes. And at the same time, it turns out that these processes are outdated. They need to be gotten away from. There's no longer need in them. So are we in a position to effect to this turnaround? I think the big question here is whether we're making a difference between the concept of business process digitization and digital transformation, on the other hand. I believe it's there that all the confusion starts, because when I get familiar with digital projects in EAEU, when I read government decisions about how they are going to improve the quality of services being provided, I see that 99% of these things are about digitizing the existing business processes. And unfortunately, there's no understanding of what makes digital transformation different from mere digitization. And in the meantime, the emergence of new society, the advent of new forms of self-organization of business, they're happening in the sphere of digital transformation rather than digitization. We're saying that a lot of professions are going away, being replaced by absolutely new ones that we hadn't even been aware of several years ago. Can't we say the same thing about government functions? A lot of government functions are obsolete and outdated because these services can be provided based on digital platforms, even without any participation of the government. Because digital offers you more effective and efficient solutions. And here there's something to think about. The next important track that people are thinking about today, I mean the leading scholars, goes about this. Artificial intelligence intervenes in the decision-making process. Artificial intelligence acquires new abilities and new talents for self-development. And whether we want it or not, but in many ecosystems, we use AI because we trust those optimization solutions that AI is offering us. We trust the computations that AI is performing. We trust the recommendation that it issues regarding the impact on human behavior. And there arises an ethical question in the first place. Where is the border at which we need to make a conscious decision and not to allow any participation from the AI? And where's the border where we have to clearly define, based on many parameters, moral, ethical, philosophy, others, that AI should not be allowed into this sphere? This question or this decision has not yet been made. It's under discussion. But what all experts agree on is that AI is changing the thought process in people. The very thinking process is unthinkable today without the use of digital technologies. We are consciously and sometimes subconsciously leave a lot of decisions to machine technologies and tools. From this point of view, if we take a look at what's happening in the Eurasian space, is also quite relevant and important, because if we are not going to do a substantive discussion of AI, the EAU will crumble in 2 years. Why? Because digital technologies, as I say, are rushing into our lives very fast. All governments are doing digitization of their activities, and our governments are doing that as part of the mandate that they have. To it, solving the challenges and goals that exist on the national level, which leads to the fact that the implementation of the four freedoms, free migration of goods, workforce, services and capital, if they're going to be digitized in different philosophies, in different standards, in different modes, we're going to have barriers emerging which will inevitably lead to the demise of these common markets. We have to start thinking about it now. What new meanings are going to be created in the Eurasian space as well as overall. A topic for discussion, including our today's discussion, considering the people who have been invited to take part. I think these are the very people who will help us get a broader perspective on the challenges of digital transformation within the Eurasian Union. So therefore, colleagues, let me see the sequence of topics that we need to discuss. Can you please announce the time allowance? How many minutes do we have? According to the timing. Up to 4. Let's start with a question to Andrei Filatov. Why are we going to start with Andrei Filatov? Because he represents a major company, one of the biggest digitization and data economy companies, both worldwide and in Eurasia. And from this perspective, I'd be very interested to hear your opinion about facts and conditions that needs to be created in the Eurasian space so that we could have an opportunity of scaling your solutions so that we could position ourselves worldwide as a conglomeration that is capable of scaling solutions across the Union. And what hot subjects would you mention that can foster the deepening of our integration? Thank you. If you allow me, how many minutes am I allowed? I thought we would be advised 10 minutes. 10 minutes to each speaker. Thank you. Thank you very much for such a great introduction. I think you have done a great job setting the context for our discussion. I represent SAP in CIS. I'm General Director of SAP CIS. And I would like to discuss several digitalization challenges and opportunities, because digitization is on the one hand about an opportunity to make our lives better, to make our business more effective. So the goals of digitization are very positive. On the other hand, there are problems related to some political trend, to digital sovereignty, to information security, because as soon as we make information available in the internet and the cloud, what's happening with our personal private data? This, of course, is a very important question. And these things need to be addressed both by technology companies and government regulators. On the one hand, an attempt to solve one kind of problems inevitably leads to the emergence of other problems, or otherwise saying by solving one problem we create a set of others. For instance, a system to protect information about your citizens, your business, complicates collaboration opportunities for intercompany and inter-country collaboration. And now we're observing this process. There's digital sovereignty on the one hand, and a need for global collaboration on the other hand. And within the Eurasian Union, the Eurasian space, we need to find ways to solve the problem, because even between countries that have a lot of joint projects, joint partnerships and connections, business and political will to be part of a joint space, some basic information transfer questions are not yet solved. But the main aspect that I would like to cover is about cloud technologies. It's impossible to develop, to imagine the development of digital projects without cloud technologies in the current world. Almost all digital solutions are one way or the other functioning in the cloud. What's a cloud? A cloud is basically data centers that a lot of people have access to, and they transcend borders. Any data center can support customers regardless of where they are geographically. So what's the benefit of a cloud? Why can't you do digitization in your own enterprise within the four walls, within the perimeter, as they say? Firstly, because the speed of change, the speed of updates is absolutely different. And now with the advent of digital technologies, we need to be able to adjust to the current situation very fast. COVID has taught us all that sometimes it is even done without our will. So COVID has arrived, the pandemic started, and everybody had to go into a lockdown to start working remotely. And that's an example of situations where you have to make decisions very fast. I can tell you that in Russia, there used to be a lot of companies and organizations where employees could not work remotely. But because of the pandemic, almost all organizations implemented this remote work capability very fast. Video conferencing, we've all got used to it. There are no more purely offline meetings. We are used to take part in all sorts of video conferencing from home. But had there not been cloud technologies, it would have been impossible, because how would the humankind survive without these technologies in a pandemic like this? It's hard to imagine. But these are just examples, illustrations. If we want to build up the pace of digitization to digital transformation rather than digitization, and I think you were very right in highlighting this distinction. We need to make sure that the data are protected so that we could provide the speed of change, going away from opportunities to abuse these services. This picture shows very well how even a small change in climate, just by 1.5 degrees Celsius, how it can affect the environment. So it has already happened, and if another 1.5 degrees Celsius come into play, it may mean that there would be palm trees growing in Moscow. And droughts will start. The problem of watering the fields is going to become quite serious. This is what's already happening. Unless we solve this problem globally as a humankind, maybe in several decades we'll encounter the problems that no digitization will help us solve. But digitization will not help us solve the climate problem alone. Digital tools can help us solve this problem. And I think this is where all the participants in the process should focus on, including the government that needs to provide for the required regulation and support, business that needs to switch to conscientious way of doing business. ESG is a popular term today. People are talking, everybody is talking about ESG, that this topic unites the whole world. Politics go away, and we need to interact on this agenda. So I would like to mention several points here. Well, the focus today is made on greenhouse gases. Of course, greenhouse gases is not the only contaminant. Plastic and plastic turnover is also a big subject. In a lot of companies, they are banning using plastic in retail, for instance. In Germany, they went completely to paper packages. But producing paper is not a very ecological process. Plastic can be processed, reprocessed, so the garbage collection, garbage sorting can be done to help this. So the penetration of digital technologies allows us to do the right accounting of all this carbon trace, because sometimes it's very hard for us as lay people to understand what's the essence of this digital trace. For instance, we're sitting in this building, and there's a digital trace, a carbon trace of us being here. We breathe, we consume the power. Most of the power today is produced by burning carbon. The percentage of renewable energy is too small, and this is one of the biggest challenges. But how to account for the carbon traces business correctly, how to reorient towards renewable power sources, to think of new power generation ways that are not as adverse. Here we are offering our services to foster this collaboration. Of the 17 UN SDGs, we've selected 8 where the environment is number 1, of course, the accounting, analysis, fast deployment of systems, and taking the required measures to reduce the carbon emissions. This is the first and basic things that can be done. This, I think, is the subject that I would like to mention as an illustration of this kind of interaction. Of course, digital interaction is not limited to ESG, the ESG agenda, but this is the most important agenda today, I think. In conclusion, I'd like to mention another problem that we see every day. It's a problem of skilled talent. Now there's a huge shortage of skilled labor, a huge shortage of developers. As a result, the salaries of programmers are sometimes higher than those of CEOs in some companies. Programmers don't show loyalty. They just leave you. Today you had a team doing digital technologies, and tomorrow they're all gone, and you don't know who to go to help. And this is a very broad problem. And universities need to be involved, because what the universities are doing, what kind of specialists they churn out in the market, is also a question. I think it's also a topic to be discussed and addressed by the Eurasian Union. We have great talent growing in this country. Our kids are winning international Olympiads in physics, mathematics, programming. I travel a lot, to different countries, including those in the EAU. And I see that youngsters are very talented in our countries, and we need to strive to make it so that they shouldn't want to go to the West. They should want to stay here. And we can see that these green agenda, and by the way, this is an example of how things form a closed loop here. The agenda is very attractive to the young people. I saw the results of youngsters voting in Germany, and they all voted. A lot of them voted for the Green Party. I think it's a very important story. I hope I managed to touch upon the main trends and opportunities.
Thank you. We invite you to cooperate in, among other things, the formation of the Eurasian digital platform for eco-environmental monitoring. We have a draft concept that we have prepared and submitted for discussion and coordination to our potential partners and the government. And the environmental topic is something that we need to promote together. And given your proposals, we would like to discuss the concept that we produced at the Digital Initiatives Foundation. Thank you. I would be delighted to. Now I have a question to Pavel Tkachov. Pavel Tkach, Belarus. He should connect online now. First Deputy Minister of Communications and Information of the Republic of Belarus. Pavel Nikolaevich is the one who knows the Eurasian topics really well. He is aware of all the problems and issues concerning the implementation of joint projects. He has personally participated in the drafting and preparation of Eurasian projects. He was one of the authors of the concept of Eurasian digital transport corridors, and now Pavel has an opportunity to look at these from the perspective of a particular ministry, government ministry. It is especially interesting for us because Belarus has a strong potential in the IT. Unfortunately, that potential is largely used by transnational corporations, and about $3 billion is the amount of the IT sector exports from Belarus as commissioned by large transnationals. Pavel Nikolaevich, it would be interesting to know what you think about what needs to be done for us to activate cross-border digital projects within the Eurasian space. How we best use the potential that has been accumulated in Eurasia for our own purposes, not only for providing services to the transnationals. Thank you. You have the floor. Good afternoon, distinguished Tigran Surenovich, friends and colleagues. I agree with what the previous speakers said. This is a wonderful time of high speed and rapid development of new technology. Data are as important as finance and labor resources. The need to overcome the slowing down of the rate of growth of productivity is what boosted the development of new guidelines and technology, and their competitiveness depend on the development of the digital economy. The economic consequences of the COVID pandemic caused a lot of constraints and restrictions, which required many people to work from home, and therefore digitalization of production, and hence the value of the Eurasian economic space is even higher, where we should follow the same rules, trying to achieve the common results, allowing our economies and businesses to develop well. Back in 2017, the heads of governments approved the two key goals in the development of digital projects. The first one is integration, preventing any barriers to technology and increase the openness of the respective economies. And secondly, achieve the global competitiveness and getting integrated in the global economy. So what we need to do now is together creating the foundations of the digital economy. And that is one of the priorities of what we do in Belarus. Unlike other sectors where various rates could be applicable, in IT, you need to synchronize things. As for the infrastructure within the Eurasian Union, indeed to address an integrated information system has been created to provide for intergovernment exchange of documents and data with creating common processes and common information resources and protected and dedicated channels. But that is not fully in line with state-of-the-art requirements in terms of architecture or services provided, nor the speed of response to challenges. Secondly, is the expansion of the cross-border space of trust that is required for intergovernmental electronic interchange. We have taken too long to address that because development of trust should provide for the residents of the member states to get access to whatever legal services, no matter where in the Eurasian space you are based. The initiative of the EBD on mutual recognition of electronic signature has been a step forward towards the paperless technology, which is really efficient and effective. However, that is only bilateral cooperation. What about the other countries? I would like to hope that our experiences gained in this Russia-Belarus electronic signature project will be used by other member states as well. It should be done now as we actively work on digital traceability of products, promoting the ecosystem of digital transport corridors. It is necessary to move away from regional or local digitalization projects. We need to build a common and single digital market without any barriers or limitations that the Union is striving for, and that is only possible to be done through digital transformation. And on that, our competitiveness will depend. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Pavel Nikolaevich. You touched on an important fundamental issue, the speed or rate of change, how fast our legacy information systems get obsolete. You recalled the integrated information system of the Eurasian Union, which is obsolete as it is now. It was launched 5 years ago. Many business processes were launched, others were not. And it's been so many years, and it appears that the system itself is obsolete now. Basically, new quality of solutions needs to be offered. The very concept of governance and management should be reconsidered, because given the current institutions that make decisions, it is not possible to use Agile, for instance. Agile is counterindicated, especially for national institutions where bureaucratic processes are so heavily regulated that any position will get old and obsolete while you try to have it registered, not to mention its implementation. So that's a really fundamental issue that covers, that pertains to the entire governance system that has to be revised and reviewed and revised as to how change and transformation should be managed. Our next issue is Marlen Aydarovich Sikhaev, representing one of the best-known and most authoritative companies in Kazakhstan, a state-owned holding ZERDE, operating in the ICT area, a multidisciplinary holding company. It would be really interesting to learn your, Marlen Aydarovich, opinion about, for instance, how efficient, how effective is the current mechanism of governance system and support measures that exist in Kazakhstan. You have the floor. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Our topic is very wide, We can take hours and days discussing it. I have a brief presentation for you. First, a few words about Zerde, the company I represent here. This is the infrastructural system and the IT system that is being created in Kazakhstan and would be able to provide services to the entire region because of similarity in the economies and mentality. What you see on the screen now is the area where Expo 2017 was held in Astana, which is now called Nur-Sultan, the capital city of Kazakhstan. That's where we are building an ecosystem that would be compliant with state-of-the-art requirements pertaining to digital transformation, digital infrastructure, and human capital. The colored spots are the entities belonging to the Zerde holding company responsible for various functions. That is a territory where, starting from 2024, such a concentration of businesses would be achieved that are involved in IT, because there is a new tax regime which is entitled Astana Hub. Of course, we took good example from Belarus and their high-tech park that they created. With a lag of several years, we did the same, learning from the Belarus experience and trying to avoid the bottlenecks that could stand in the way. We tried to do our best to build the infrastructure that would meet all the requirements. As a result, we have created a technology park of IT startups supporting the IT infrastructure of Kazakhstan. That is a new sector. And of course, we try to do our best so that government support measures were best possible. First of all, via the tax preferences. Another line of activity is innovations grants, the policy pertaining to innovations. That's where we support not only IT, but other priority sectors of the economy. Our holding company has a National Information Technology joint stock company that is responsible for the IT infrastructure. All the state-owned databases are serviced by the National Information Technology joint stock company. We employ 2,500 who provide services to the central government bodies and local government bodies as well. So the entire IT infrastructure is serviced by just one operator, which lays a foundation for working with big data. And we're working now on the future platform because big data means big economy that should make a real difference. We are also the operator of government services. For instance, we have fully digitized this ecosystem. The results are seen on the screen, the ratings we have obtained. We are 29th in the UN rating on the development of electronic government. It took us decades to do this. It started in 2008 when Zerde was established as a holding company. And you see all the figures pertaining to these ecosystems, starting with e-government and document exchange. All the processes are there. More than 300 information systems, although we are looking at this system, and now it is more than 400 information systems existing in the country, that those that provide government public services. The government has been very pragmatic. At the startup development stage, there are measures of support from the government and from others than the government, which allows startups good conditions for the development. Still, Kazakhstan is not the leader in the IT. We do not have a large IT export, so the primary access to VC money is quite difficult. So the government has to provide support to that. Together with the World Bank, we're about to complete a project to create an early venture fund to support projects that at an initial stage would be too risky for business angels. So we work in the same direction as the government, in close cooperation with it. The infrastructure that I mentioned was the tax regime of Astana hub, tapped from the Belarus system. It's been 2 years that it it's been there for 2.5 years. 579 companies entered this hub with a total turnover at $379 million, which is $389 million, which is quite good for this country. That is quite a good indicator, and the money that is saved owing to the tax preferences gets reinvested, thus accelerating the development of those startups. This is a list of tax preferences. We try to do our best to improve those. I should say this is one of the best tax havens for the IT industry that you can find anywhere in the world. So if there are businesses interested in enjoying such preferences, we are ready to invite and welcome you there. Class A offices, the entire infrastructure, all are there and available and waiting for you to come. Of course, talking about the IT ecosystem, we cannot but mention the Astana International Financial Center. That was a national project based on the English law, which opened up large opportunities for investors, as well as a high degree of certainty that their investment in Kazakhstan, if they go through the International Financial Center in Astana, they are certain that their investments will not be lost. And also it is very convenient for them to use the English law the same as they use elsewhere. Kaz Innovations is another asset that we use to guarantee investments in innovations with providing of various grants. Basically, this tool is also part of the government support. And, of course, people are the key, and people are the new oil in the 21st century, and people need that you properly invest in them so that we can use people well and wisely. The Astana IT University is an important part of the infrastructure. What I mean to say is that government support measures, depending on the stage of development, are done in large volumes. And your question was how effective it was. That's a multiple factor that cannot be easily measured. For instance, the government did not receive $15 million because of spending that on building the Astana hub. But then over 80 companies came from abroad and got registered, enjoying the tax regime with creating new jobs, attracting their international experts. Same people come there, use our infrastructure, visit restaurants. That produces the multiple effect. And the goal of Kazakhstan is to make it into the top 30 best developed economies in the world. In order to achieve that, the government needs to take certain measures, sometimes even risky measures, so as to catch up with the best developed countries, members of the OECD. So my personal view is the currently utilized government measures are necessary for our country to rapidly move closer to the best developed economies today. Thank you. Thank you. We signed a memo on cooperation with ZRD earlier today, and your presentation allows us to better understand the very interesting and exciting work that lies ahead, waiting for all of us. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, we closely cooperate with your Digital Innovations Foundation, and we know now that such an institution like yours is lacking here, because initially the government cannot possibly invest on a large scale, but the next stage in the startup development, that's exactly where your participation is really needed, and I think we're going to go and create a similar system. Thank you very much. Will approach me after this session, because it was not possible to hear what you were saying. I know the answer. Okay, we're limited on time. Sadly, colleagues, I'm asking the question of Alexander Marchenko, who is very knowledgeable and experienced in implementing reforms in the financial sector and in the government. He used to be the governor of the Central Bank of Kazakhstan and the vice premier of the government of Kazakhstan. Nearly all reforms in Kazakhstan had him deeply involved, done under his leadership. So his experiences are very valuable. Grigory Alexandrovich, digital transformation seems to be posing new questions before the regulators, among others. I mean central banks, who are faces new phenomena, who cannot possibly understand all the consequences of going totally digital, especially as large transnational corporations who accumulate huge amounts of data, relying on the cloud computing and AI, and know more about people than commercial banks would know. And discussions are underway that those companies would like to go in for financial services, entering the financial markets. Basically, this digital transformation is a challenge for any regulator. What do you think? What is the way regulators should respond to the current situation and the current trends that we see coming with the digital transformation? Thank you. Thank you, Tigran Surenovich. We are given 10 minutes. Very generous from you. Let me make an introduction, 3 minutes long, and then I will talk about central banks and digital money. When I started to work for the non-ferrous metallurgy ministry in Kazakhstan in 1980s, robotization was very hot, and automation, but still human miners still mine for coal, not robots, contrary to what people thought back in 1980s. In the 1990s, all the hype was about renewables. Just recently, the representative of a German company said that the share of the renewables is not high enough. And how many trillion euros has been spent? Huge amounts has been spent on the renewables, still not high enough. When I first was appointed the governor of the central bank, many people would come to us saying that the future belongs to the internet, and that you need to go and urgently buy startups from Israel or the Silicon Valley. Then the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, and all those people who blame me for being too conservative, that you guys in the central bank know nothing, all of them lost large amounts of money. 10 years later, fintech was all the hype. This still continues. What we see now, digitalization and ESG. I have heard it before, you know, more than once over the 40 years. I fully agree with what Tigran Surenovich said. Too many words and declarations have been spoken, but I do hope this time you will all try not to deceive us, and that renewables will account for 50% or more, and humans will not have to peril in mines. Now it's talk about driverless technologies. It used to be called unmanned technologies before. Well, I've said it more than once. Digital money of the central bank was devised in Kazakhstan in the spring of 2013, or so we thought, because in the autumn of the same year it appeared that, independently of ourselves, the Central Bank of Ecuador had invented that. Roberto Giori, who used to own a large company producing equipment for printing money, and he had a slightly different concept. From paper notes, he proposed to make digital banknotes from paper notes. The government at the time did not support our idea, and therefore the digital money in Kazakhstan, the digital money of the central bank in Kazakhstan was not introduced, but it was supported by the People's Bank of China. They are holding a pilot for it. They've been holding a pilot, doing a pilot for 2 years now on a similar idea. So as people say, everything is so rapid and fast now, it's been just 8.5 years that the central bank started to closely look at digital money of central banks. And the goals can differ between large central banks, such as Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank, as opposed to banks in relatively smaller countries where dollarization is high in their respective economies. And there's a number of questions that regulators have. Not only regulation of the money market participants. There are financial supervision agencies who do that in many countries. But these two functions, monetary policy and payment system, there are situations emerging now that the borders get diluted, and what you say is actually a two-way road. On the one hand, large banks, I'm not going to give you the names, try to build their own ecosystems, while large ecosystems try to penetrate the financial services market. And what you said, Tigran Surenovich, that was interesting. What if they just buy a large bank to avoid any problems with licensing? But there is another aspect. What if they buy the post office? We haven't discussed that, because the post office is also a financial service provider. They hold all the necessary licenses, and they have a branch network that is larger than any banks. And by the way, in Russia, in Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan post office, what if it is bought by Amazon or Google? What the regulator is going to do? From the perspective of government revenues, it will be a gold mine. But from the perspective of being able to compete with such an ecosystem internally for a medium-sized economy and a medium-sized financial system, I fully agree that there's a large difference between just digitizing existing services and digital transformation. Transformation is what most of the population or most of the financial market participants are not ready to, because we don't know what it would look like. And there are many, many questions there, including methodological ones. If a central bank is a participant and actor in that market by providing financial services, along with commercial banks doing the same, correct? Or digital platforms, ecosystems, whatever you called it. How they're going to regulate this complex system if they are one of the market players? Then, in theory, I haven't heard or read any discussions. Similarly, as previously the UK and New Zealand started to spin out the Financial Supervision Agency to avoid the conflict with the function of the central bank responsible for the monetary policy, because that is easily a source of conflict of interest. And here, from the perspective of a payment system, maybe we need a separate regulator for the payment system, while the central bank should be just one of the market players. That deserves a separate discussion. No one has thought about this so far, as I know. Getting back to my major topic, digitalization is an inevitable process, and this is the name of the game. If you're in, or you'll be hit by digitalization. We shouldn't underrate, but we also should not overrate that. Kodak was the inventor of digital cameras, but the quality was too low. They didn't want to develop that line of business themselves. Others did that, and people ridiculed them because of poor quality. But then digital cameras went and killed the entire old industry, nearly killing Kodak itself. But all the romantic photographs are still not taken by digital cameras. Let me say a few words about music. Of course, you can be listening to an MP3, but that's canned music, you know. Any decent person would go to concerts to listen to live music, doesn't it? And any decent person would have a hi-fi or high-end system. Vinyl production fully stopped 15 years ago, but was resumed 7 or 8 years ago, and their quality is much, much higher than it used to be. So you will fail in digitizing everything and everyone. Like you fail to robotize everyone, or promoting fintech everywhere, or Israeli startups have not conquered the world. So we shouldn't underrate the process, but we shouldn't overrate it either. And we keep getting back to still another topic about digitalization. Similarly to e-government, it's not government officials carrying iPads, like many people still think. The e-government is needed to kill the middleman between the people and the services that the government cares to provide. And what you said was absolutely correct. A correct digitalization is what will cause the development of the electronic government in such a way that the quantity of services involving human officials creating the background for corruption, while the quantity of such services involving humans will radically go down, with improving the quality at the same time.
So, therefore, whatever relates to the financial sector, I'd like to say that now it's an open process. That's called free-for-all in English. And in actual fact, the fight is going on between central banks, digital platforms, and commercial banks. The digital money of the central bank will make commercial banks unnecessary. They can keep doing lending, which they don't really like to do. But as to the biggest part of the services, if a person has an account with the central bank, with digital money, they won't need an additional middleman that charges commission for the services. That's why our commercial banks understood that in 2013 and lobbied through our government of that period that this law should not even be submitted to the Parliament. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. I would like to go to Andrei Bezrukov with a question. We've been publicly discussing issues related to critical infrastructures. You got deeply involved in the subject, and you identified the problems that exist in this area, including in the Eurasian space. I would ask you to share with us how important this critical infrastructure is. And in your opinion, what is the direction we need to go to overcome the problems that you mentioned in your presentations? Over to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sarkisyan. I will use this opportunity and try to add a spoonful of contaminant into the barrel of digital honey. When clouds were being discussed, I got a question: how to go back to Earth from these clouds? Because any person with a feeling of responsibility for the state has a question: who actually makes these clouds, and who reads information in those clouds? And just like this, we need to overcome two conceptual fork points. The first fork point is about the one that emerged when the Internet was born, when the Internet was the environment of freedom. It was a global environment of hope. And digital cooperation were trying to only do good and nothing like that, or at least not to do harm. We remember that time. So the world where these large global corporations were born, they were covering the whole world with this network of good. They were creating global platforms, and everything seemed to be fine. That was the world that was global. There was one center, and there were no problems with digitization because it would have gone out from the center. It would cover the whole world with that good. But unfortunately, this world no longer exists. Had this world been in place, there would have been no conflict in Ukraine or in Taiwan or a lot of other places. The world we're living today is absolutely different. It's a world of competitive environments. It's a world of competition between the technology and economic blocks. For instance, China and the Western world. And once we understand we're in this world, we see that this single environment can exist in the B2C space. We can keep, watching TikTok and other things, but in the B2B and G2G, the whole question is formatted quite differently. And there's a question about sovereignty. The question is how safe and secure this system, how it can or cannot be used by my geopolitical adversary. And here we get to the question that the war of the future will be a cyber war. Many years ago, we were prepared to fight cyber criminals. Well, let's forget about them. They're just stealing our money. But if we have a cyber enemy or cyber adversary rather than cyber criminal to address, and if a city like Moscow and its critical systems will be compromised today, what are we going to do? From here, we see a choice. So the first focal point was between the common space and the space digital space that has been divided. Unfortunately, we may not win a cyber war because the investment there is even higher than used to be in the military technology. If we try to fight in that war, I can write off trillions of dollars, and still there would be companies who would outstrip you. But the second fork point is closer to us. Whenever we're talking about the digital environment, digital space, we need to differentiate between the common environment and the critical infrastructure environment. These are two different environments, and the customers are different and the rules of the game are different. In the common environment, which we call B2C, it's all fine. It's normal digitalization, and here we can discuss whether it is just digitization or is it digital transformation. And that's a big question, by the way. But there's another environment where it is absolutely not important. It's an environment where security comes first. Those systems that underpin the government, they cannot be unsafe and unsecure. If they're not secure, you better not build them. It's just similar to the three piglets story, where two piglets were laughing very loudly when the third one was building a strong foundation for his house. But unfortunately, we're in exactly the same situation. We're being pushed to build the digital house faster and faster, but the foundation based on which we could build a good and strong house is not yet there. We don't yet have our own software foundation and so on and so forth. And here, to run and build a house of twigs is reckless, put it this way. So these two spaces need to be differentiated. And that perhaps is all I would like to say. But if we apply the understanding of these fork points to the prospects of Eurasian space development, then in the first place we should think about the space of security, where each country operating in that space should trust, should be confident that the security of at least the most critical systems in their countries should be at as high a security level and subject to the same stringent requirements as in your own country. And we cannot weaken these requirements in this space, because otherwise, if in one of the systems security would be lower, that will be the weak link. Thank you. Thank you very much. You have brought me to the question. The microphone is off. Oh, well, I didn't switch it on. Hello? Yes, I have. You have brought me to the question that I asked Fyodor. I was going to ask Fyodor. You were talking about security. Tigran, the microphone, please. We can't hear you. Ah, this way. Thank you for your comments. You have brought me to the final question that I prepared for Fyodor Alexandrovich. I was thinking about digital sovereignty, and because Mr. Lukyanov has a very sharp perspective, sharp sight, he has a better handle on some questions, including those geopolitical questions that you touched upon. He has a feel for those topics that are relevant and important, that can be presented in a very exciting way. So you touched upon the question of critical infrastructures, their security, and whether the government is in a position to build such infrastructures on their own. Or maybe in the Eurasian Union we should be doing it together. But then a question of sovereignty comes into play. Are our governments, are our countries prepared to share the sovereignty in order to get something more? And security, I think, is the most important component in the modern world, especially for small countries, that quite obviously can't compete in the digital space with multinationals, and more likely than not, they just turn into consumers of these services that are being offered to them commercially. So from this point of view, I would like to ask you, Mr. Lukyanov, what do you think regarding digital sovereignty? Maybe it might make sense to create some self-sufficient supranational body in the Eurasian Union that would be responsible for the critical infrastructure, for cybersecurity, because it's quite obvious that doing it alone, the countries will not be able to achieve that. Thank you. Many thanks for the question. Andrei has helped me because I can skip maybe 2/3 of what I could have said because we're dealing with the same things and we're actually of the same opinion. I think that the whole setting of the problem about the creating a supranational digital sovereignty body contains an internal contradiction, because even in the closest relationships built on deep interdependencies, I'm talking about multilateral organizations, the biggest question that starts surfacing, goes back to what Andrei said, is about, well, the growth of what one might call egoism, but otherwise it can be called a natural feeling of self-protection, because the trend for the world fragmentation has become obvious. The pandemic did not create this, it just made it more relevant. Actually, it had emerged quite a long time ago, and with a specific reference to our Eurasian Economic Union. The question that comes up immediately is the one of trust, because sovereignty is, of course, an undeniable value. For smaller countries, it may be an even higher value because it took them more effort and pain to acquire that sovereignty, so they have more interest in protecting it. But this said, it's obvious that protecting the sovereignty is a big thing today, and not everybody has the required tool set to do that. But any multilateral organization is about delegation part of your sovereignty, and then you're getting into an internal contradiction where I believe we're going to get confused and we won't be able to move far. So in answer to the question, I'm not sure that in the foreseeable future we can count on some centralized body to protect our common sovereignty. Yes, there is common sovereignty, but it is a sum of specific sovereignties, and each particular is perhaps thinking about their particular sovereignty even more than like 10 years ago, when it was felt that sovereignties dissolved. I would support what Grigory mentioned, because any going into the processes that we see is a very important thing. We have all witnessed and are witnessing a story of Facebook. 2-3 years ago, Facebook was like a light that was, casting the light on the Parthenon work. And when Facebook helped in ousting President Trump, who was a bad person according to everybody, they became a hero. But then in just 2 years, look what happened. What is Facebook if you are to try to follow the American discussion? I've been following political cartoons for many years. There's no worse evil than Facebook. It's just an abomination, according to the mass media, and it just happened in a click of a switch. it's where business, large business interests are combined with fashion, social political fashion, and of course very serious processes that we're discussing. Because Facebook, just as other technology platforms, have acquired power that has become a threat to the traditional powers that be. And whatever slogans they may use, of course, a very tough resistance is happening to them. In Marxist terms, by the way, it's like class struggle. Mr. Sarkisyan started with saying that digitizations improve efficiency and performance. No doubt about that. But it also increases vulnerability. So that's why this competition that Andrei mentioned, you can't get rid of it because the consumer will not understand you. And however much you try to persuade a rank-and-file person that these technology platforms are stealing their data, maybe they'll even believe you and start nodding their heads. But when you try to strip them of a service that they're used to, they will just not match one with the other. So they will feel like they're deprived of what they have a right to. And in this sense, I think that all governments, all states, all government bodies that are responsible for it. And in Russia we see it a lot, and I'm sure that this is true for other EU countries. So it's a big dilemma, because going too hard on security, that's it, we're shutting down, you can't do that, has a very strong political risk to it, all the more so that we don't have a replacement for a lot of services. We don't have our own YouTube, and whether you like it or not, a lot of people are using it. If they strip me of YouTube, I will be upset, even though I may understand the reasons for this to be done. It's all exacerbated by the fact that the governments should be responsible for their own sovereignty, for the sovereignty of a alliance of nations, and for the well-being of their citizens, who to a certain extent will understand your explanation that the sovereignty requires these measures, but to a large extent they won't. And how to resolve this problem, I don't know. Looking at Russian bodies, we have a commission to protect the sovereignty. Their resolutions sound very harsh sometimes. So you would believe that next day, they will ban everything. But in actual fact, they understand that it can't be done. And I feel for them, because it's not clear how to do that. And to which extent what Andrei was talking about. The global competition between huge technology platforms as part of what we might call a Cold War between the US and China. So whether it offers us alternatives or, in fact, the other way around, because those people in this country who are trying to regulate the activities of these companies, for them, both the Chinese and American companies are hazards, and whether you are able to get your own, it's a big question. Another topic that I think is very important. Firstly, I fully agree with what Andrei Filatov said regarding the green agenda. Whatever your attitude to it, but it's become a mainstream within which we have to work, and there's no way to bypass that. And what you said about the emission measurement system, it's of principle important, not only for Russia, but for other EU countries, because unless you do that, it's already clear what's going to happen. We are going to see very progressive and very right-minded people from the US or from the EU, and they will say, these are your emissions, and now pay for them. And when we said, look, why? I mean, we have other data. They said, no, we have this way of seeing them, so we're sorry. It's very difficult, but it's clear that Russia has the clout to affect the regulations as the EU or the US. But it's a question that's very important for business and the organizations. And I think this is something that would make a really priority line of activities. And the last thing, it's more about Russia because it's more advanced in technologies, but also it applies to all other countries. We quite often are upset about our soft power. I actually don't like this concept of soft power. I think it was bad people who invented this term. But it just so happened we are very concerned that the image of Russia does not match the one we would like to see for Russia to be attractive. It's indeed a problem, but all our discussions about what we need to protect, to support, to protect the country's history, it's all good. But unless Russia has an image of a modern country that offers solutions for the future, anything else would make no sense. Just like yesterday, I was taking part in some discussion, and it turned out what all organizations are doing that are promoting the image of Russia in Latin America, like a contest of pictures about the victory in World War II and Gagarin's flight. Indeed, important topics, but who are we going to attract in Latin America by bringing their attention to what happened 70 or more years ago? This is an important area. Russia, that has a powerful potential in the digital economy, should promote this first and foremost. And by the way, in terms of unified approaches to sovereignty, it's also a very important thing. We see, for instance, our Prime Minister, who has done a lot for this in his previous position as head of a tax service. On behalf of Russia, he's offering something that these countries don't have and are not going to have, just because we have taken care of building it. And the last thing, I think my Kazakhstani colleague mentioned that about a need to be more adventurous in certain approaches. But so adventurism has traditionally been prevalent. It's one of the areas where we have traditionally had prevalence over our more traditional colleagues in the West, and this should be supported and maintained. Thank you very much. I think I built the logical question quite correctly, because Mr. Lukyanov did a great job generalizing on all the subjects that we have discussed today. We have exhausted our time. In conclusion, what would I like to say? Futurologists have an expression. We can't predict the future, but we can say what outcomes human activities will have. And from this point of view, our future, our joint future, will be just what we are going to build together. So, on behalf of all the participants in our session, allow me to thank our speakers for a substantive discussion. Thank you.